Good morning, everyone. How are you all doing? Yeah? All right. I have a question for you. Have you ever considered your vocation? And when I say consider, I don't mean a fleeting pass by, I wonder. I mean, a mulling over a period of time. If you have, just raise your hand, let me see. Okay, great. So we're getting there then. We're in a good place. What I want to do is an overall picture for you, so you start understanding how the church is thinking. Anybody knows what DNA is? What's DNA? Huh? The one? Very good. So he gives us the technical definition. What you studying? Huh? Not even biology or chemistry. All right, I love you. Great. So DNA is a basic building block of everything that is living. Anything that has life is built upon DNA. Everybody's good at that? And as a basic building block, it is what gives us specificity. It makes us who we are. And how the DNA connects or communicates makes us who we are. So I am proposing there is a Catholic DNA. You could live with that one? Huh? No, you could live with that one? There's a Catholic DNA. But the difference between Catholic DNA and biological DNA is the difference between free will and biology. In free will, we could choose to ignite the Catholic DNA, or we could choose not to ignite it. With biology, it is what it is. With the Catholic DNA, it is what it is if you choose to ignite it. And if you choose not, because of free will, then not. Everybody good with this? You sure? So, in Catholic DNA, there are interconnections that communicate, that when they communicate well, they give you the specificity of a Catholic. And it gives you that thing that is a Catholic thing. And when you choose not to ignite it, when you choose against God, then it is not there. Have you ever met somebody and when you met them, you knew from the interaction, oh, yeah, this person is a person of God. You ever had that experience? You knew. Why did you know it? How did you know it? You just knew it because the Catholic DNA was ignited in them. And because of that, something in them said to you something about who they really are. Do you want to be such a person? That's the question. Do you want to be the kind of person when somebody meets you, they say, that person is really a person of God? I'm not hearing you. Oh, I was wondering, because that's the ultimate objective of everything we do as church. That you are, by your presence, witnessing to something that is much, much bigger than you. Everybody's good with this? So, one of the most challenging things right now is the transmission of the faith to the next generation. Have you all seen that challenge? How many of your friends are no longer Catholic or no longer practicing? Just raise your hand if you have friends who are no longer practicing. Great. That means that all of us know people who we grew up with as Catholic who have chosen not to ignite their Catholic DNA at this time. Correct? Yeah? And the question is why? The question is why? So, this is just a kind of an overview again. So we start in this sense. Jesus Christ gave us a threefold mission: prophet, priest, and king. By virtue of your baptism, you were anointed with holy chrism, prophet, priest, and king. So it's not that something is lacking, it is there and given to you. The transmission of the faith and the threefold mission serves this transmission. So what you've been given by baptism, what you've been given by confirmation, is to serve the transmission of the faith. And how does it serve it? Because the Spirit given to you in baptism and confirmation, when you allow it to be ignited, allows you to be the kind of person that witnesses to what God really is about in this world. And when people see that, they come to faith because of your witness. Everybody good with that? So if you are living your baptism and your confirmation, then you are transmitting faith to the people that you are meeting. So far, so good? But the challenge is we're not transmitting it very well right now. And so to transmit the faith, we really have to focus the church on missionary discipleship. And that's both a disciple who is willing to take the faith to other people. Have you ever desired to be a missionary disciple? Let me see your hand up now. Those who have ever desired to be a missionary disciple, let me see your hand. Okay, so we have a new desire for many of you today. I want you to desire to be a missionary disciple. That is a person who is a disciple of Jesus Christ, who is listening to Christ consciously and living what Christ is asking them to live, and then bringing that to other people also. Everybody's good with that? We're realizing that to form missionary disciples consistently and well, that we have to mission the domestic church. For the last 30 years, we have tried to do youth ministry and engagement without family ministry and engagement. And what that has done, it has meant that over the 30 years, we are doing more and more remedial as we go along. So rather than receiving young people who come from a domestic church where the faith is being lived because the Catholic DNA is ignited and they're experiencing that as a normal part of their family, and they come to us now for the formation, for confirmation, when our young people are coming from families that don't pray together, families where faith is not important, families where church on a Sunday is no longer important. When they're coming from that to the sacramental program, we are doing remedial education. And we're making a major mistake because we keep wanting to make the program longer and longer because of how remedial the program actually is. The answer is not to make the program longer, because that is actually chasing more of the young people away than anything else. Am I correct? Yes. Oh, so your Archbishop understand all you then. That's sweet, eh? So we are applying the wrong solutions to the right problem. To mission the domestic church, the church has to be a community of inclusivity and dialogue. The church must become a community of inclusivity and dialogue. Why? Because if the church is not a church of inclusivity, a church of dialogue, and a real sense of community, the families are not going to be attracted to come to the church. Therefore, the children are not going to be coming to the church as practicing Catholics. When they come to confirmation, they're not going to be knowing anything about the church, and we have a vicious cycle. Everybody, have I described what you have experienced in youth and sacramental life in our church? Oh, that's beautiful, eh? So at least we agree on the analysis. That's a good start. Now we have to go, what is the solution? So baptism gives us our Catholic DNA. And the Catholic DNA is the basic building blocks needed for the church as family of God, united in a communion and sharing life and love. Acts 2:42. I want you to think of the Catholic DNA as the spiritual building blocks that are required in every single one of us that would, when ignited, will bring us to live as missionary disciples, bring our families to be domestic church, and bring our church family to build community, inclusivity, and dialogue. Everybody, yeah? But Catholic DNA demands intentionality. It's not something that happens by chance because God proposes, He seduces, He cajoles sometimes, but God never imposes God's self upon us. I use this steel pan as a model of holding some things together. Because all culture has 3 levels. All culture has 3 levels. The top level that you can see is the level of the artifacts. The middle level is the level of the value system. And the bottom level is the level of the belief system. Every culture has beliefs, values, and artifacts. And you know the belief and the values of a culture by knowing what a culture will refuse to borrow and what they will be willing to borrow. When you come up against what a culture refuses to borrow, you start understanding where the real belief and values of that culture are. And if a culture is willing to borrow anything and believe anything, then that's not a culture that is sustainable. It's going to collapse. And that's part of what has been happening. We've been borrowing things that we should never borrow and believing stuff that makes no sense. And so we're collapsing because we haven't had that specificity of our beliefs and of our values. Everybody's good with that? Old-time Catholics will remember, and there are very few in this room, when every Saturday you went for confession. Every Friday you did a fast. You passed in front of a church, you made a sign of the cross. Those were the artifacts of Catholic life. So when we threw out family prayer, there was a time when you sat for a meal together, everybody held hands and said a grace. Before you left in the morning, there was some form of prayer that was said, you go. In some families, you came to the parent, they blessed you before you left. When the artifacts got thrown out of the family and the practices that held the church together got thrown out of the family itself lost its Catholic DNA and drifted away from being a missionary, from being a domestic church. Back to my model, at the level of the artifacts, which is the notes, the high notes at the top of the pan, around the rim of the pan, you have Acts 2:44, Acts 2:42, and they devoted themselves to the prayer, they devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles, to the fellowship, to the breaking of the bread, and to the prayer. The 4 devotions of the early church are the 4 artifacts that are supposed to hold the Catholic DNA in place. When those 4 things are present, the church is alive and Catholics are ignited in their DNA. When I come to the middle level where you see the IHD, that is integral human development. And that comes from Pope Paul VI and Pope Benedict XVI, when they say integral human development is the vocation of the church. And what is that? That's the development of each person, every dimension of the human person. And what is every dimension of the human person? When you go to the Pauline letters, you see Paul talking about the mind, or what we will call IQ, the heart, cardia, what we will call EQ, the body or soma, what we will call PQ or physical intelligence, and the soul, which we will call SQ or spiritual intelligence. Each of us have 4 dimensions that we are supposed to develop, and develop as much as we can each of the 4 dimensions, not one or the other. So a lot of the feedback that we've received from the synod and from the consultations is that we have very little EQ in our parishes. Am I right? The emotional intelligence to treat people like people is not there. Did I got that one right? Or not, I didn't get it right? Oh, you sure, eh? Which means that there is a dimension of the human being where we are lacking as Catholics, where we have to grow that dimension, the emotional intelligence that is required for good and sustainable relationships, that is required for working as a group, which is required for a group holding together in communion, as opposed to everybody in a fracas breaking apart. We don't lack intellectual intelligence, you know. We don't. We bright too bad. We bright too bad. And physical, well, we here and there on that. But the emotional and the spiritual, we have a deep lack. After confirmation, many times I would just, and if you all are confirmation teachers, you all know, you all see me pull 2-3 people out and just talk to them for a few minutes. And after a few minutes, I know how good or bad your program was. Yeah. I don't know. I done give you a grade already and I gone. How do I know? If I ask a child who has had 2 years formation with you, tell me about your prayer life, and they start scratching their head and they say, wait, you mean when I come to church? But that too, but what you do every day. And they don't have a daily rhythm of prayer, then I know you have not done what you need to do as a catechist. And V in the middle, the deepest note in the pan, that is our value system. And we'll see how that plays out now. So the 4 practices, the teaching of the apostles, the fellowship, that's the communion. And that's one of the practices. See how these Christians love one another. And when you have fracas in a group, like a choir, like altar servers, like hospitality, like, you want me to keep going? When you have fracas in a group, what that means is that the national DNA is more powerful than the Catholic DNA. Because the national DNA right now is to fracas and to breaking everything apart. The Catholic DNA is to hold in communion that which might seem impossible to hold. When people are being Catholic and they're living and igniting their Catholic DNA, you see communion and you see people working together and you see a higher good coming out of it. When the Catholic DNA is not ignited, what do you meet? Fracas, division. He say, she say, we say, them say. And everybody, by talking everybody, and you can't find a unity to hold the thing together, because this country, Trinidad and Tobago, we have 1.4 million nations living here. It ain't one nation, it's 1.4 million nations. We're more heady and headstrong than most people in the world. And the Catholic DNA does the opposite. It brings people to communion. When people are not in communion, it's because the Catholic DNA is not ignited. Okay, so the value system which we spoke about, and Matthew Kelly puts it really nicely in 3 interlocking ideas. The first is that each person is called to become the best version of yourself. Have you heard that? And to assist others becoming the best version of themselves. Correct? That means incremental steps and consistent growth. Every day you take a small step to becoming a better version of you. Very small step. You want to run a marathon? Great. Don't put on your sneakers and go and run 26 miles on the first day. The first day, just put on your sneakers. The next day, walk around a little bit. The next day, go and walk for 10 minutes. The next day, half an hour. And you keep increasing incremental steps to grow towards becoming the best version of yourself. And the third is that the best version of yourself is a saint. The best version of yourself is a saint. Can you get that last piece? So the best version of you is not the rich and the famous or the young and the restless. The best version of you is a saint. What is required for you to become a saint? Every single day, you make an incremental step towards that. Pope Benedict XVI has given us some really great gems. Our belief system, our deepest belief, is that we believe in a God who created and redeemed us through his Son, Jesus Christ, and called each one of us in a unique way to vocation. Ephesians 4, 1-16. A God who created, a God who redeemed, a God who called each one of us in a unique way to vocation. Can you hear that? That's our belief. That God is not out there somewhere. God created. God didn't leave us in our foolishness. God redeemed. And God doesn't see humanity as a mass. God has a vocation for you personally. How many of you have heard me in a confirmation homily? And what am I focusing on in my confirmation homilies? Your personal vocation. That young person, you have a call from God in your life. So back again, the 4 practices. Integral human development is our value system. Vocation as our belief system. Now, when Catholic DNA is ignited in our families, in our religious communities, in our commissions, in our ecclesial communities, and in our schools, when the Catholic DNA is ignited in all of these, what we will have is an explosion of energy, an explosion of grace, and a sense of communion that will hold the living God as so important that it will witness to the whole nation. Right now, only 16%, 14% of Catholics are coming to church. That means 86% of Catholics are not even trying to ignite their DNA. And of all those coming to church, a lot of Catholics who are coming to church are not living with the Catholic DNA. In 2017, the AEC bishops hosted a workshop here on vocation. And out of that workshop on vocation, what we came to realize is that whereas we've been trying to pick vocation from trees, the trees are dying out because the Catholic family is no longer a domestic church. The parishes are not holding our young people and our older people to ignite the Catholic DNA. And therefore, we are having a poverty when it comes to looking at vocation. And the realization is really what I will call a paradigm shift. When a paradigm shifts, those who are the center of the paradigm find it difficult to make the shift. Those on the periphery can. When a paradigm shifts, it's like seeing the whole thing from a totally different perspective. And so the perspective now that the AEC bishops has given to us as a framework is that everyone has a vocation. And if you start with the center one, before you were formed in the womb, I knew you, I called you by name. So each one of us in our mother's womb is known by God and called by name. What that says is that you have a vocation and God knows you in a personal way, that you alone are known in that way. And what it also means is if you don't live your vocation, it will never be lived by anybody else. But to live your vocation, you have to ignite the Catholic DNA. You have to have practices, values, and beliefs that ignite your Catholic DNA. If you believe that God has a unique purpose for you, then your life has to be about searching for what that purpose is and seeking to live that purpose with everything you have. Because if God called you, redeemed you, and saved you, and called you by name, then your response to this God should be, bend my heart to your will, O Lord. That should be our response. Your kingdom come, your. And if the Catholic DNA is ignited and we recognize that God has called us personally by name and uniquely, then our response should be, Lord, show me what you want. Or as Samuel said to the Lord, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Speak, Lord, The second level of vocation, which is from Ephesians 4, 1-16. I, Paul, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to live your life worthy of your vocation. Live your life worthy of your vocation. This is Paul now speaking to the Ephesians. Live your life worthy of your vocation. And then he goes on to talk about there's one body, one baptism, one Lord, one God. So in other words, we can't be fracas and disconnected from each other. We have to live that life. That first call is a call to communion. Then he goes on to say, some of you will be called to be preachers, and some apostles, and some teachers, and some this and some that. So, but each one of you has been gifted for the vocation that you have received, for the building up of the body of Christ. So the purpose of your vocation in your response to God builds up the whole body of Christ. When you are living your vocation fully, the whole body is being built up. The third level is your state of life. And they don't have too many options in the first part of this. You're either single, you're married, you're consecrated, or you could be single and discerning. Everybody got that one? So in other words, everyone at every stage should be discerning their vocation and seeking how to live that vocation more fully. That's when the Catholic DNA is ignited. You are living your vocation fully. And when you are living your vocation fully, people recognize in you something that is special. Everybody good? Yeah? There's a subset in that because some people might be called to be a teacher, a doctor, a nurse. Somebody might be called to a special service, to be a scientist, to be whatever it is. And that's a subset of this part of it. So that not only is it the state of your life, but it is what you end up doing that's also part and parcel of your vocation. And that means that if you are married already, then you should be praying to discern and live your vocation more fully. Because a married person should not be living as if they're single. Am I correct? Am I correct? And if you're single, you should not be living. If you're single, you should not live like if you're married. Because that's not your vocation. And there are some things that single people should not be doing because you're not in that vocation. Am I? And if we are discerning our vocation, it means that you can't be living against the laws of God and trying to discern your vocation at the same time. If you're discerning your vocation, you and God had to be right. If you're discerning, you have to be living your Catholic DNA, igniting it fully, and living right with God. So if we understood that at every stage from 0 to 99 plus, you are discerning and seeking to live fully your vocation, and that's the goal of every single Catholic, regardless of age, then vocation is not a matter of young people alone. It's a whole of church approach to living and igniting the Catholic DNA. If you go to the next one, conscience. The tradition has taught us that the voice of conscience is the voice of God. Where do we get the first call from God? In our conscience. Every moment of every day, you are being called by God through your conscience. You know the old thing of the good angel and the bad angel? No, don't go and do that now. You know when you go down that road, you know already what will happen. You know, don't go there. The next angel, oh God, you know how sweet it is? But you know it's sweet, you know you want it. Oh God, you know you done 3/4 there already, you might as well go full. Your voice of your conscience is the first place where you experience in the most tangible way your call to your vocation. If you're married, you can't live like you're single. If you're single, you can't live like you're married. And your conscience is what holds you to living your vocation at the stage you are. If you are discerning, then you are seeking to find the way to hear God's call and to answer it. And the last one is integral human development, because Pope Benedict and Pope Paul VI says integral human development is the vocation of the church. The whole of the church, every one of us all together, have a call from God to the development of each person, every dimension of the human person. And until we understand this last piece of the vocation, we will continue having the kind of mediocre Catholic culture that we've been seeing. It means every one of us is called to become the best version of ourselves. Every one of us is called to grow in the 4 areas that we spoke about. Every one of us is called to become what God wants us to become. Every one of us. And we're also called to help each other to grow and become what God called them to become. And that means that each one has an obligation to fulfill and live their vocation fully. But each one of us also has an obligation to help each other to live and fulfill their vocation fully. So last year I wrote a pastoral letter, Building Community, Inclusivity and Dialogue. How many of you have seen that? Okay. If you go on catholictt.org, you'll find it. When you find it, just scroll through to Catholic DNA. And do me a favor, read it. Could you do that? Read the section on Catholic DNA. Down to the end is the shortest part of the letter. It recaps what I'm saying here today. It will reinforce what I'm saying here today and help you to see this as a model. So this is a model of church. This is another way of seeing church. So it's not just turning up for communion and going home. It's about reigniting the Catholic DNA. It's about each person living their vocation, each person discerning their vocation, and each person helping each other to live their vocation and become the best version of themselves. Thank you.